I'll take a minute now, is to mention that when we do go into Q&A, I'm going to ask people to raise your hand, and preferably using the reaction raise your hand. It helps me to be able to see in order who's put their name in for asking a question. And then please keep it to one question per cycle. You can come back into the queue again and ask a second question, but that way we can try and get through as many as we can. And I'm going to say also, why don't you go ahead and introduce tonight's speaker?
And
really
please, and would people, other than people who are actually speaking, please mute yourself. That would be great.
Thank you so much. Nancy Goodman, who is our speaker tonight, has a very long history in understanding communities and the depth of the quality of life and the issues for many people, many different segments of the population within those areas, including particularly the underserved. Once upon a time, she got her PhD in Harvard, where her dissertation worked with a lot of underserved communities, people of color, realizing how the issues that they deal with day in and day out over time impact what they can aspire to and their quality of lives and their health on many different dimensions. She then came to California with her husband and worked in several different counties in healthcare and in the public system in healthcare. And that too, anytime you look at it from a healthcare lens, and particularly with those who use the county health facilities, you really come to understand a lot of the problems and potential government solutions for trying to have an equitable chance, really, at having a decent life. I first met Nancy apparently more than a decade ago when she had organized 2 of the MoveOn.org regional groups, and this was slightly after MoveOn it founded itself during the Bush years. And Nancy was the only person I ever heard of who had organized not 1, but 2 of those groups. And of course, did it with a great smile on her face and was so effective with us. More recently, we've known her through Reclaim Our Vote, where she not only helped bring Reclaim Our Vote, which works with underserved people in states that have at least 20% people of color, to get disenfranchised people to then be able to get back on the voter rolls and vote and make a big difference, including, for instance, in Georgia, which went for Biden, which was not a clear thing ahead of time, and in the 2 Senate runoff elections to get both a Black senator and a young Jewish senator for the first time from such a southern state. She's really the right hand of Andrea Miller, who founded that, and which is a project of the Center for Common Ground, and set up all of the infrastructure, which is so effective. In our own backyard, more recently, she's worked a lot on immigration and has been concerned with ICE turning over now over 100 people, an average of 1 a week for the last few years, directly to, or sorry, not ICE, our local sheriff working directly with ICE, proactively turning over immigrants who are getting out of jail before their families, can scoop them up. This is at midnight out the back door. And that too led her to great concerns about the sheriff's department. So she has now started Fixin San Mateo County, which she'll tell you about today, and has gotten a great array of partners to work with this group. There are a good number of people on this call, including Gail and Bill, who are also on Fixin San Mateo County. And I highly encourage all of you to come join the fray. Nancy Goodman.
Thanks, Elsa. And it's great to be here. The only thing that was awfully nice of you, but the only thing you left out that people here would really appreciate, 2008, I was in Ohio volunteering for Obama in Columbus for 6 weeks, and Carol Dorshkin came for the last week with Jackie Watkins, and they shared a room, and it was so fun to be there on election night with Carol when they called first Pennsylvania for Obama. Some guy, we were on the street going to the party, and some guy rolled his window down and pulled over in the middle of the street, yelled, they called Pennsylvania for Obama, and went inside to the courthouse in the hotel in Columbus, and they called Ohio for Obama. At which point one nice lady fainted, and we were all worried about her, but she said, I was just so excited. So that was a good memory with Carol, who we all love and miss dearly. So I'm going to share my screen and just go through some slides if people can see them. So Fixin San Mateo County, as Elsa mentioned, is an attempt to basically establish an effective sheriff oversight board and inspector general in the election in November 2024. So it will be a ballot measure in 3 years, and the ballot measure will set up an oversight board and an inspector general. And that's what we'll talk about a little. What does that mean? Well, this is a new group. We just started meeting in May, and there's probably about by now 50 pretty hardcore local activists. We are focusing on the sheriff. We're not focusing on police departments. And if I can go down to this, what can civilian oversight really do with the sheriff? For one thing, I'm not sure that everyone knows the difference between the sheriff and the police. And that often comes up as a question. The sheriff in almost every place in the United States is elected by the people. The sheriff has no boss. The sheriff is a legacy of the slave catchers in the Civil War and after. They are accountable to the people every 4 years. They aren't accountable really to the Board of Supervisors except for managing their budget. And it's really, really different than the police. The police chief in every city is pretty much hired by the city manager and reports to the city council. And so if the police chief is doing something wrong, that person can be fired. If there's a problem with their policies, the city council can vote to change the policies. We don't have that option with the sheriff. And our effort with Fixin San Mateo County is focusing on the sheriff, partly because there is no other option other than to go to the voters and try to get an oversight board. Our Board of Supervisors could set that up, but they're not interested. But there's a lot of advantages to this kind of a setup. One is it protects civil rights because you have somebody there in the public that's looking over the sheriff's shoulder, so to speak. It helps manage risk for the county, believe it or not, because you can put policies in place that would prevent the kinds of abuses and problems that end up getting the county sued. It helps build bridges between law enforcement and the community because these civilian boards always have a goal of reaching out to the community, educating the community, and listening. So with all that, it helps ensure accountability, basically, in terms of transparency and letting people know what's going on. These groups often put out a public report, and that kind of effort really supports policing. It supports effective and more positive policing. So there's a lot of advantages of oversight. Let me try to go to this. Let's skip one. The question, Who else has civilian oversight? There's 220 cities in the county and counties nationally that either have oversight of the police or oversight of the sheriff. And there's 25 in California. And this number has increased a lot, even just since last year after George Floyd's murder. In our state, sheriff oversight, like the county sheriff, like we're trying to do, San Francisco put that into place last November with a vote by the voters, more than 2/3 or about 2/3 of the voters. Los Angeles has had it in place for some years and the voters strengthened it last year. Sonoma County has had it in place for some years and the voters strengthened it last year. Santa Clara County has put it in place, and we'll hear more struggles from Joe Sumitian about the challenges they're going through. And Sacramento has had it in place for a few years. It doesn't always work so well. AB 1185 is a new bill that just went into effect in January, partly because of the problems with the current oversight boards. Specifically, the Sacramento sheriff didn't like the report that their oversight inspector general put together and wouldn't let the sheriff come in. Sheriff would not let the inspector general come into the jail, which was part of his job. So it partly because of that, the legislature passed a law which gives subpoena powers to these groups and says you can set up an oversight board in the inspector general and they can have subpoena power. So this law is strengthened. I've noticed that this goes 2 slides forward. So, but we don't need oversight in San Mateo County, right? Because we're exceptional, right? And we all realize that. We're special. We're progressive. We don't have to worry about racism here. Wrong. We kill people of color. One of the reasons that we started Fixin San Mateo County is because of the taser deaths of 3 unarmed men of color in San Mateo County. Even after public outcry, the board and the sheriff spent $1 million for more and better tasers. The people are still on the job who killed Chinedu Okobi 3 years ago. The sheriff deputies are still on the job. A recent report was put out that Black people are less than 7% of the population in our Bay Area, but they make up 27% of the people killed by law enforcement the last few years. And that's the full Bay Area, but we are not unique. And in our own county, there's been 52 use of force deaths by the police, and no officer has ever been charged. So that's one argument in favor of oversight. Another is we arrest people of color. Blacks are 9 times more likely to be arrested in our county. Hispanics are twice as likely to be arrested in our county. And we cooperate with ICE immigration, as Elsa mentioned. We are an outlier in our county. We've turned out over more than 100 people directly from jail since the California Values Act passed. And these are people who were eligible to go home to their families and their jobs, but instead the sheriff typically will keep them in the jail a little bit longer and arrange with ICE, and the ICE van drives into the downtown McGuire Street Jail into the Sally Port, and they turn the individual over to ICE. We've had 2 dads be deported just this spring who were turned over to ICE. And we really are an outlier. We turned over 26 people just last year in the midst of the pandemic. And look at Marin, Napa, San Francisco, Santa Clara, Sonoma turned over 0. And Solano turned over 1. And Alameda isn't even a competitor. They turned over 8. So our sheriff's policies are not keeping our community safe. We do need some oversight. So how does this work anyway? Basically, there'll be 2 parts. There'll be a ballot initiative that sets up 2 things. A civilian oversight board, and they typically have 7 to 11 residents They're appointed by the Board of Supervisors, but our ballot initiative will talk about what kind of people they need to appoint. And those are lay people. There can often be an attorney on it, but they're basically lay people, members of the community who work in the community. There's also an inspector general with a small staff, and that person's trained to do a little bit more with the background of how to do inspections and how to do investigations. Both of these will work together, and they both have subpoena power, and they would do regular public reports to the sheriff and the Board of Supervisors, which is where you get the shining the light on what's going on. So remember I said there's two parts. The Civilian Oversight Board is one part. That is going to be community members with a lived experience, maybe with the jail, with a family member who's been deported, maybe with a family member who's been subject to excessive force, or advocates. And it could be attorneys, it could be people, or human rights attorneys, it could be civil rights attorneys, immigration attorneys, and it can be community organization members. They typically have a monthly public meeting, and they do a heck of a lot of community outreach and listening, going out all over the community and hearing what the concerns are. They are able to receive and investigate complaints and incidents and use their subpoena power if they need more information. And they can recommend policies. They can look at the use of force policy that the sheriff has and make recommendations. And I will say that even though we're just looking at the sheriff, not the 20 police departments, the sheriff is the big player in town. The sheriff runs the jail. If the sheriff makes changes or if concerns are brought to the fore in the sheriff, the rest of the cities are also very aware of that. So that is the Civilian Oversight Board. The second part is the Inspector General. Sorry that this keeps popping around. The Inspector General is usually one person who's trained as an investigator. Often it's an attorney. They can investigate whistleblower complaints, incidents of the use of force, deaths in jail, deaths in custody. They can look at the racial profiling trends, and they can recommend discipline and policy changes. And the Inspector General works closely with the Civilian Board. The Civilian Board is the public-facing people. The Inspector General kind of works more likely with documents, with forensic audits and so forth. Whereas it's the board that meets monthly with the public, which is who we are going to see as public members. So once we get this on board and we get these people appointed, we're done, right? Not quite, because we can't set the sheriff or Board of Supervisor policy. We can't discipline or fire deputies. The sheriff is elected, and not even the Board of Supervisors can tell him what to do in the jail. The Board of Supervisors can't tell them to stop using tasers. The Board of Supervisors can't tell them to stop pulling people over for minor infractions. Can't tell them to send a crisis counselor out instead of a armed deputy when there's a mental health crisis. And right now, if you kind of look at the picture in our county, the Board of Supervisors is not willing, from what we've seen, and all of us have been in multiple meetings with the sheriff and the board, our current board is not willing to stand up to our current sheriff and even ask him to make some changes. So there are some serious limitations, but on the plus side, we can create transparency and accountability, which we do not have now. This has been shown to work. In one place that really stood out to me was Los Angeles. One of their reports talked about the sheriff turning people over to immigration and said, gosh, it costs about $2,000 for each person you turn over to immigration. It costs that in our taxpayer money. We don't want that, because you have to fax to the people back and forth. You have to hold the person, you have to transfer them. to the sheriff's van. All of this stuff takes staff time. You have to analyze their history. And Los Angeles has now quit turning people over to ICE immigration when they get out of jail. So creating the transparency and accountability will be huge. You know, the civil grand jury can do that too, and they do reports, but they don't necessarily focus on the sheriff. So back to just, again, how are we going to pull this up? We do want a voter initiative in the presidential election. That's been recommended because you want a high turnout election for any of these kind of voter initiatives that you want to pass, whatever it is, because that's when you're going to get a lot more young people are going to be voting, a lot more people who might be concerned about what's going on in the sheriff department. We've been meeting for 2.5 months now. Not a lot, but we've done a lot so far, and we're now starting to do outreach and fundraising. So what do we want from all of you? We need a favor, and thanks to Karina Merritt, who also, as you might know, she upkeeps the Democratic Volunteer Center website, and she's really a lead person. She keeps our website. So she came up with the acronym. We want funding. We need to raise money for a campaign consultant, mailers, election attorneys, and so forth. We need an army of signature gatherers. We won't need them till almost the election. We won't need them till 2023, but we need to start figuring out who the supporters are now, because we need 50% of our voters to vote. And that's probably going to be about 150,000 people that we're going to need to vote in favor of this. We need volunteer commitment. We've got 50 active people, but we need more. We need overwhelming public support. And we know we can have resistance. I mentioned Sacramento. We also saw resistance in Los Angeles from the sheriff. The sheriff in Los Angeles put their inspector general under criminal investigation 2 years ago and hasn't resolved it. In Sonoma County, the inspector general retired, partly as a result of what his doctor said to him, that he was getting harassed so much publicly and privately by the sheriff that it wasn't good for his health. He's still active in the field, but he's not the inspector general. And in Santa Clara County, and we're going to hear a little bit more about this September 23rd, which I'll mention later, but Joe Simidian, who's a supervisor there and spoke to us a few months ago, has been a champion of sheriff oversight, and they can't even get the sheriff to sign a memorandum of understanding to share information with the oversight body. So we will have resistance, and that's one of our major concerns. My little guy. Okay, that's better. Some of our strategies, we're really working a lot with other groups like DFA, and we're also going to go out to the other clubs, Democratic clubs, and make presentations, you know, similar to this. We have other people in a sort of building a speakers bureau. We're going to build public awareness and support. We're doing a survey, which we're going to launch in a couple of weeks, and media, social media events, and fundraising. And that's where I wanted to mention the event that's coming up September 23rd, and I'll give you a link later to RSVP, is our very own Santa Clara County Supervisor Joe Simidian, who came and spoke with us a couple of months ago about police reform. He's going to talk about the benefits of sheriff oversight and some of the challenges of sheriff oversight. And people might have noticed in the newspaper today, there was an article that all 5 members of the Santa Clara Board of Supervisors took a no confidence vote in their sheriff yesterday because of corruption, because of a failure to make improvements in the jail and the treatment of people with mental health issues. So I think hearing from Supervisor Joe Simidian, who's obviously also one of the better speakers out there, will be fascinating and it'll be perfect for us. And it's part of our outreach. It's part of Fixin San Mateo County saying, let's let people know what's going on. And we, DFA, is a co-sponsor of that. So Well, the fixers is basically, we have a small leadership team and then this core planning team that makes decisions. And then we have these great work groups. Everybody's met a couple of times by now. And I'll talk a little bit more about the 3 work groups in the next slide, but wording, process, and outreach. And everybody meets monthly. So if you do want to make a commitment, the minimum would probably be coming to a once monthly meeting, but there's work that gets done in between. So how it kind of fits together. The leadership team is small. The core planning team makes the decisions. The initiative wording work group figures out what to say in the initiative, what words to use. Are we going to require, for example, that at least one member represent labor? Are we going to require that at least one member is 18 to 24 and has lived experience in the jail, like Chicago does? Are we going to require that at least one member has an undocumented family member who has been impacted by the ICE policy? So that kind of wording will be really important. And we have a process work group for the people that like the legal details. And that group is basically saying, okay, what are the rules to get on the ballot? What do we have to do? What's the time frame? And then the outreach work group is the big one, the fun one, connecting with other organizations like this, persuading the public, educating the public, and you can be in multiple groups. And thank you to everyone who already is in one of these groups. I'm going to skip over the role of the groups because we talked about that and go to this question. Can we get all this for free? No. Okay. Everyone's sitting down because we're on Zoom. It's estimated that a ballot initiative in this county will cost $500,000. That's between now and November 2024, spread over 3 years. We've heard this from 2 different people. 200,000 or so before it qualifies for the ballot. We need election attorneys, a campaign consultant. We need to do polling, signature gathering. It's often assumed that about half the signatures that you gather have to be gathered by paid signature gatherers, and they cost a dollar amount per signature. And then after it's qualified for the ballot, which would be August 2024, that's coming right up, believe it or not, we're going to need about $300,000 for advertising, media, yard signs, mailers, that kind of thing. So we will be raising large amounts of money, and we will be doing that, starting that soon. But that's just to get this thing passed. If it's passed, there's going to be an ongoing cost to the county. And remember, we're setting up a ballot measure that creates a civilian oversight group, and it creates an inspector general with some staff. There needs to be some budget in the ballot measure. In Sonoma County, they have the budget set at 1% minimum of the sheriff budget. So that's one option. In San Francisco, they do it differently. They say one inspector or oversight, investigator for every 100 sworn sheriff officers. So there will be a budget, and the county will have to pay for it, and that will be part of what the voters vote on. In San Francisco, they estimated, I believe, $3 million a year. And the sheriff said, well, that's really expensive. And the San Francisco proponent said, well, you guys spend $6 million a year on overtime. So if you cut that a little bit, we can pay for oversight. So it's going to be a little bit of a battle, but we are going to have to do that. And the rest of the slides are actually maybe not the most interesting, but you can have the slide deck after. I'm going to go through them just briefly because I did not know how much we spend on the sheriff. Our budget is in the county. It's about $3.33 billion. We've got 5,600 employees. Criminal justice is about 24% of the total employees, and currently about 13% of the county budget, going up to 17% in a couple of years. Now, criminal justice is more than the sheriff. It includes the district attorney, probation, the private defender, the coroner, and a little bit on the courts. So when you look at it, though, the sheriff has by far the bulk of the money, $286 million. If we ask for 1% of that for oversight, that would be about $2.9 million a year. And that would pay for the inspector general, probably 2 or 3 staff. The staff would also help staff and do the logistics for the meetings that are taking place every month for the civilian board. Some communities pay a stipend to their civilian board members, and we are leaning towards that because we want people to be able to be a member of the board who aren't necessarily financially independent. So we owe them some small stipend. One of the counties has something like $200 per meeting, maximum of $5,000 a year. So it'd probably be something like that for 7 or 11, 10 people. It's not going to be that much money. But the sheriff department has 14% of the county employees right now. And of course, most of their money goes to salary and benefits because they have more than 800 employees. And when you look at what the sheriff spends their money on, the biggest single ticket item is the jail, $116 million. $60 million for patrol, that's them driving around and doing arrests and patrolling neighborhoods and so forth. So this is just a sense as we move forward, it's important for us to know what we're talking about in terms of what the sheriff's doing right now with their money and where it comes from. And this is the one I wanted to go to. Where the money comes from is very interesting. The sheriff contracts with several cities to provide police services because the cities have pretty much usually it's because they didn't want to pay for a police department, they can get a better deal from the sheriff. And 10% of the sheriff's budget comes from those exact things. So the cities are San Carlos, Millbrae, Half Moon Bay, Woodside, and Portola Valley. And Half Moon Bay, I know Harvey's here and has his hand up, and we'll get a chance to talk about that. But I sat in on a couple of months ago. He and Council Member Joaquin Jimenez, brought forth a simple proposal, which would say, "Hey, Half Moon Bay, maybe we should start doing something like they do in Oregon with the cahoots model, where they send a crisis counselor out instead of a person with a gun, and they're less likely to shoot people who are in mental health crisis." Eugene, Oregon's been doing it for 30 years, not had any problem, makes sense to us. Well, Harvey can say more, but the council at that point tabled it. But I remember reading the paper, the sheriff kind of said before that, well, if you pass this, I can't obey that. I have a contract with you. I'm going to just do the policing the way I'm doing it now. I'm not going to change. So the cities don't have a lot of say right now in what the sheriff does. And I believe that one of the advantages of oversight will be cities can come forward and say, look, the sheriff is contracting with us. So I'm concerned that they killed Yanira Serrano in 2014 for no reason, and she had a mental health crisis, and they haven't done anything to change things since. So it'll be a chance for the cities to get a little bit more visibility as well. So I think this is my last slide, my second to last. My question, is it worth 1% of our $287 million sheriff budget to have citizen oversight, to support civil rights, accountability, better policing, community trust, rebuild community trust? And we believe the answer is yes. And you do too, which means you want to see the last slide, which is, of course, what can you do if it goes to that slide? How can you help? Well, you can let me or Elsa or Ashley or Gail or Bill know you're interested, or David Waterbury, or you can sign up on our website. You can join a work group, especially you can attend Joe Simidian's talk. And we can post this in the chat as well. It's September 23rd at 7:30. And DFA is a co-sponsor of it. And so we would hope everyone will attend that talk. And you can email info@fixinsanitarycounty.org with questions. Me and Karina currently are the ones that answer those emails. So that's it. Stop screen share.
Thank you so much, Nancy. That was fabulous.
Ooh.
Susie, do you want me to save you, or are you ready to go? Well, you're muted, so I don't really know what you're saying.
Sorry.
Do you want to say?
I thought I unmuted myself and maybe I muted it again. With the first couple questions we've got Marshall, then Harvey, and then Greg.
Okay. That was really great and informative, Nancy. Terrific. And your committee has done a terrific job in getting everything really organized and started. I do have a bunch of questions, but I know I'm starting only with one, and that's all I'll do. It seems clear that the sheriff is pretty much a law into him or herself. And I think most people don't even have a clue about that, but they can basically do what they want, because not only is there no oversight, but nobody has the power to do anything about it, except to not re-elect them. So my question is, why do we even need a sheriff in addition to the police? And what would be the consequences of eliminating the sheriff altogether if we could get a statewide constitutional amendment?
Ooh, Marshall, that would be super. And you know, Kings County in Seattle just changed their law so that they appoint the sheriff instead of electing him, and so they can get rid of him. But they were saying they've gone back and forth on that over the last 30 years. There is that bill that didn't make it through, which through the Assembly and the Senate this year, which was SB 271, I think, which would have said that the sheriff didn't have to be a law enforcement professional, because until 1989, you didn't have to be a sworn officer to run for sheriff. And then this guy Hennessy got elected, and he was way too progressive. He was in San Francisco County, and he stayed there for a long time. But the sheriffs convinced the legislature to limit the sheriffs could only be sworn officers. So I think a step in the right direction would be passing that bill next legislative session.
Yeah, but why do we even need a sheriff?
Yeah.
We've got a legacy to uphold. Look at
You mean the slave?
This has been going on since
catcher?
1850 or earlier. Yeah.
The slave catcher legacy,
Yeah.
you mean?
Yeah.
Well, it's if nothing else, it's the fact that you needed to have some kind of policing, and we do it here more because this is the county level, where if you're in an area that's unincorporated, then it's the sheriff that is providing that service.
Right.
All right.
Right. So basically, that's really true. We're not going to get rid of the sheriff and have no police in the unincorporated area and have police departments in the city. So it would have to be replaced, presumably, by some other policing type function.
All right. Next up is Harvey.
Thank you very much, Nancy. I really appreciate what you're doing. I think oversight is wonderful, but I believe that personality is policy, and I believe that we don't have to wait till 2024 to actually enact change. I've met with Sheriff Bolanos, and he is very clear that there is no racial profiling in San Mateo County. That's what he says. Okay. Well, there are two other people who are running against him who announced, and June 7th of 2022 is an important date. We really need to elect a new sheriff. Christina Corpus, who apparently is the police chief in Millbrae, is running against Bolanos, and Mark Melville, who ran 3 years ago, is also running. He has announced that he is really an advocate for transparency. And I think that's really important. Just one brief example, the sheriff has refused to release even to the city council of Half Moon Bay the question of whether or not there is a video record of the shooting of Harmon. That's just inexcusable. And we hope that Mark Melville, who has announced publicly that he would release that information, that's important. So I highly encourage us, DFA, to get involved in that election, because we really need to change the culture. And Sheriff Bolanos is part of this culture that's gone on for 20 years or more. And also, while we're doing that, the DA Wagstaff is also up for election in June 7th. And he is a fervent supporter of Sheriff Bolanos. And I have heard a rumor that there is at least one person who's willing to run against Wagstaff. So we don't have to wait till 2024. We can actually make some significant changes before that. And I encourage us to really check on how to do that. So thank you, Nancy.
Harvey, I want to respond to that. That is so true. Fixin San Mateo County is nonpartisan and we aren't going to track candidates, but we did realize that there's candidates running, and we talked about, do we still need oversight, even if we get a candidate that's more committed to transparency? And we said yes, because you don't really know, number one, who's going to win and how long they're going to be. But I had met with Mark Melville before, and this time I met with Christina Corpus and been very impressed. She's committed to transparency. One thing that's nice about her platform is she wants to create citizen advisory councils in North County, South County, and Coast Side, and meet with them quarterly to get input and listen to the community, which is very much in alignment with the idea of a sheriff oversight. It's not, doesn't have subpoena power, but it's the same concept. So I have said in other meetings publicly, I've endorsed her and supported her and donated to her because I think she'd be terrific, but that has nothing to do with Fixin San Mateo County. We have to keep all those candidates separate, but as individuals and members of DFA, yes, we should be looking at other sheriff candidates if we're interested in change.
And yes, I'd agree that I think that's something that we'll be looking at next year, is what kind of activities can the club be doing to support these candidates? Thanks. Greg, you're next.
Yes. Am I unmuted? Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Nancy. As you mentioned, in Santa Clara County, they're very lucky to have one of the supervisors support the same kind of ideas. Are any of the supervisors in San Mateo likely to give similar support to your idea or not?
Not that we're aware of. Fixin San Mateo County hasn't met with supervisors about this particular project, but other groups have met in the past with supervisors, and one group has asked a couple of supervisors, now that AB 1185 passed, allowing oversight boards with subpoena power, would you support that? And didn't get a positive response. I do want to say that we're talking about taking this to the ballot by getting signatures. There's another approach. The Board of Supervisors could pass a law, but they're not interested in it. Or they could put it on the ballot and then we wouldn't have to collect signatures. And in Sonoma County, they put it on the ballot because it was last year after George Floyd's murder. The board realized that the community, the community perspective was changing, and the board said, okay, you guys don't have to collect signatures anymore. We'll put this on the ballot for you. So it's possible that in the future, before 2024, the Board of Supervisors will put it on the ballot. In San Francisco, one board member, Supervisor Walton, campaigned on this and was the real champion for it and led the other supervisors to place their charter amendment on the ballot without having to collect signatures.
But as you know, a few years ago, we tried to influence the supervisors to not fund tasers, and they did just the opposite. Is that along the same line of what we're trying to do here?
Yes, it's the similar concept, which is, yes, we've met with the supervisors individually and as a group, and they did nothing about tasers. I think that it's just the case right now that with the current sheriff and the current supervisors, it's going to have to come from the citizens.
Thank you.
All right. Gail, you're up next, and then Marshall. You're still muted.
Gail.
You're muted, Gail.
I always forget. I must apologize. It's not so much a question as a couple of comments, and that is that if whoever gets elected to be sheriff, if they replace the current one, they will be faced with a sheriff's department that is composed of people who are very happy with the current situation. You could call it an old boys club. And I think they can use the support very much. I think they will need the support of an institution like this to help them make reforms, because I think just as there will be resistance to getting a commission, there will be tremendous resistance to reform. I'm not sure what the percentages are, but it seems pretty clear. The other thing is that to understand this county, I think it helps to know, as many of you probably do, that the district attorney is very important in setting the atmosphere and in creating limits on what the supervisors feel they can and cannot do. He has ways of punishing. I hear from more than one source that he has ways of punishing people who do things he doesn't like through public announcements in various ways. So whoever comes in is going to need a lot of support.
Thank you, Gail. That's so true.
All right, back to Marshall, and then Ashley.
Yeah, I think the proposal is actually great. The problem is that we're a little hamstrung by the California Constitution because the sheriff is elected, and with an oversight committee, it seems to me that it's not clear what real authority the oversight committee would have. In other words, where are the teeth other than having subpoena powers and shedding light to the community? They can't really stop the sheriff if the sheriff doesn't want to do anything.
That's exactly true. And at the very beginning, we said to ourselves as a group, if you can't change policy and you can't change what the sheriff's doing, is this worth it? The fact is, and it gets back to what Gail said, the Board of Supervisors is not willing to take a stand because there's no public support for this kind of effort. They don't see enough votes that they'd lose if they voted against the sheriff. They're better off with the status quo, the DA and the sheriff. If we can build public pressure through shining the light on abuses, there was never an investigation really of Chinedu Okobi's death. It was not really a impartial investigation at all. And if we have somebody doing that and publishing it and putting it out there at a board study session in the public, on the website, in the newspaper, it's going to start raising awareness, and it's going to build pressure on the board and the sheriff to take action. That's what happened in LA. And that's what happened in Sonoma County, which is why the sheriff suggested to the Board of Supervisors that they disband the Inspector General's office, and over time, the Inspector General retired for health reasons. These things are effective. That is why when the Sacramento Inspector General came out with a negative report about what the sheriff had done, shooting a young man whose name I forget, not Stefan Clark. He wouldn't let the Inspector General in the jail because the Inspector General was doing stuff that was bringing to light problems. So the fact that the sheriffs are so resistant in the counties that already have them is kind of the proof of the pudding to me, is they're scared. They don't want anybody to be shining the light. And as Harvey said, showing the video camera. We don't even know if there's footage. If we had an oversight board, we could subpoena that footage.
So Nancy, are the gist of what you just said is that transparency, publicizing this information does really make a difference? I mean,
yes, and we were specifically told that by two people, including Max Huntsman, who's the Inspector General for Los Angeles County, which is, is a big county. He said, you know what, it's really hard and it's really thankless and I'm under criminal investigation, but if you don't do it, you have nothing. If we continue like this, we will continue with the status quo. We will continue to have people of color killed on our streets with zero accountability. We have no choice but to try. It's kind of the same as we're doing with the climate. We can't fix it all, but if we don't try, we have nothing. And that's why we're doing it, yeah.
Thanks. All right, Ashley, you're next.
Oh, great, Nancy. This is very exciting. A very important component of it is going to be the makeup. Who is going to sit on the commission? Who is going to be the Inspector General? Can you tell us what the thoughts are of this committee at this time?
Yeah, we actually have our little wording work group has a draft, and we've written in things like, we did take the thing from Chicago. One member has to be age 18 to 24 and have lived experience in the jail. People have to, Chicago defined marginalized communities. They actually, and they say you have to be a member of or advocate for a marginalized community. And they defined it as people of color, LGBTQ community, just people with disabilities, and young people. So we're talking about, we don't know the number yet, but let's say it's 7, which is fairly typical. If we might say, well, 2 of them have to have this or that kind of background, 2 of them have to have that or the other background. What seems to be up in the air in different counties do it different ways is, how would you select these people? Oakland is really proud of their process, their police though, but what they do is they have nominations, and the nominations are public. So the public comes and they listen to the selection committee interviewing people and say, well, what is your experience with, why do you want to do this? What's your experience with police violence, or what's your experience relevant to oversight? And it makes the person, by the time they're finally selected, and then they get grilled again in public by the, when they're finally appointed by the city council, which has the final authority, it makes the person be much more tuned into what the community needs are. So that's what we're working on. And anyone who really cares about that can be in the wording work group, or we'll keep you posted on it anyway.
And
Absolutely.
it seems to me that that's so much better coming from an initiative that's promoted by the citizens rather than the Board of Supervisors. Because if they have control over who serves on the commissions, it could be a very different proposition.
Yes, and I should say something. We specifically think that it will be stronger if we write it ourselves. The other thing is, under AB 1185, to have subpoena power, the Board of Supervisors makes the appointments and also appoints the chair. And that's why it's really clear we have to put the parameters in the ballot language. So they can't appoint, as someone said, their golf buddies. The Inspector General you asked about, there's a national group called the National Association of Civilian Oversight for Law Enforcement. They're having currently having their annual conference, which is virtual. And so several of us are sat in on sessions, but they do training and resources and best practice. And they just came out with a big report last month that they put together with the Federal Department of Justice on including case studies and best practices. And they can help also think through things like, they do the training for the oversight board. They provide training when you have an oversight board, and they also provide training to the appointing authority. So once it passes, they would come and provide training to the Board of Supervisors and say, this is what it's going to be. This is what these people are going to do. It's not the Parks and Rec Commission. They're not just sitting there and talking about how to build wonderful kid-friendly activities. This is a serious business, because we're talking about oversight of basically kind of civilian oversight of the military is the equivalent of that. So that's a real resource. And the Inspector General is always trained by them and usually an attorney. And the ones we've talked to, I think the guy in LA, Max Huntsman, he had been with the DA's office, I think, or they come from other criminal justice backgrounds generally.
All right. Okay, next up is Gail and then Elsa.
Yes, well, in case you think that oversight, getting information is and transparency is a small thing in this county. It's often almost impossible to get information. For instance, when we try to get information about criminal justice fees, which means all kinds of fees that are slapped on you once you get into the criminal justice system and you carry this debt burden forever. We couldn't get information hardly at all. Yeah. And the state legislator who was promoting legislation to abolish these fees said that one of the problems they were having was they couldn't get this information about what fees were actually being charged. I mean, that's hardly controversial information. The other is that we met with supervisors and at least one of them promised us information about the racial composition of traffic stops. Do you think we ever got that information? Of course not.
Yeah. No, that's really true. That's the bottom. The crux of it is we've asked during the taser multiple, public comment on tasers, multiple public comment on ICE transfers, and we don't have any data basically from the sheriff. We don't know what they're doing.
All right. All right. And last question looks like will be Elsa. You're muted.
Muted. You're muted, Elsa.
Did we lose her?
I clicked everything but I'm new to Zoom, guys. Sorry. So it's a group, it's a question for this whole group and for the org committee and for Susie. I am hard pressed to understand a local issue that affects our culture and our quality of life, our own backyard, more so than this. And I'd love to ask whether DFA can, SMCDFA can adopt this as a major focus of what we do for the next year and a half, or from now through June 22, and then beyond, of course. But as a really important foundational year to raise awareness in the county, to help get every activist and every group you can think of who could have an interest in this, because so many of us work on national issues, national elections, state elections, and yet, my God, this is happening right here. And we have the wealthiest people in the country, and we have the poorest people in the country, in our own county, according to Ann Campbell, who was superintendent of schools for the county. And I just think it's easy for us to look sort of further afield, since we're so blue, and as Nancy said in the beginning, and overlook what's happening in our own backyards. And this is something we can so influence. And I feel as though it hasn't been made a priority for the Board of Supervisors. Mm-hmm. There are enough other issues we do go to them about, and that many others go to them about, and the police unions are the only people, talking on the other side. And I think if we could help raise this kind of awareness and make this a major effort for the whole county, we would not turn back. I think the population, the citizens of this county, would not turn back. They would get a big education that I bet most of them don't have, or most of them have this much out of what's really there. So I'd love to have people talk about adopting this as a major effort and talking about it every meeting.
Well, I think that that's something that the club can certainly do, and I certainly see that next year there may be when in January, when we're talking about creating task forces, looking at one that is specifically looking at the sheriff and the DA's races, and what can we do specifically on that for 22. But you know, we've always got things that are kind of year-round. They're not necessarily a club focus or a task force focus, but that there's heavy involvement in. And so, you know, having, along with task force reports, having, you know, a monthly report on what's doing with Fixin San Mateo, you know, those are all things. And if there's events going on, we can certainly put the blurbs in our newsletters. And anyone, Ashley, you got anything you might want to add on that club-wise?
No.
Okay. Okay. All right. Let me go on to Marshall.
No,
and then
yeah.
we'll finish up.
Well, actually, this is a little bit of a follow-up on your question and also on what Elsa just said. But in your presentation, Nancy, it's pretty clear that there are lots of things that could contribute to follow-up. And it seems to me that there, either our club or a task force or a subgroup or whatever, a group could focus on meeting more frequently with each of the Board of Supervisors to press this issue on somewhat regular basis. And depending on how we get, what kind of response we would get, to speak frequently at the Board of Supervisors meetings. Now, I know that when you go to the Board of Supervisors meetings, they give you your 1 minute or 2 minute, and then they politely ignore you because we went and spoke against funding the sheriff for more tasers, and they heard something like 40 some people speak against it, and they didn't even have the politeness to even acknowledge that. They just then voted no, that they voted to give them the money. So those of us that are experienced for many decades, and I think there are a lot of us listening tonight, experienced for many decades of just getting out there and confronting them by speaking at their meetings, and if necessary, embarrassing them in various ways, including, if necessary, sit-ins because they're not paying attention.
Sit-ins.
There's no reason to not do that. So anyway, it's a follow-up on actually what Elsa said and what Susie asked, but it seems to me that that's the kind of thing that would get their attention because they hate being embarrassed in public.
And I love that and those ideas. The other thing to consider is, I mean, pretty much this is a Democratic county. If the Democratic clubs, if we have a resolution or can come up with a good language for a resolution to support the Fixin San Mateo County approach for sheriff oversight and get some of the other clubs to adopt it and have it, I know that Jim has already taken it to the Democratic Central Committee, but we could have a more specific version if we have a particular resolution. Then we can also use that and say to the board, because Karen Mackey, I think, would support it as well. And also say to the board, look, the Democratic clubs are all in favor of this. And I totally like the idea of doing that, little bit of pressure. And we can use city council people like Harvey and like Joaquin Jimenez and others who are,
Diana.
Yeah, and Diana. And other elected officials like Shara Watkins and Noelia Cortoso and Kalime Salahuddin in Daly City to speak out.
Well, and I think the idea that the more that come to speak, then they have to say, well, wait a minute, there's this ground swelling and it sure can't hurt. We can at least be annoying.
They're not doing anything now, so it's not going to get worse.
All right. All right, Gail, got one last quick one?